Hello, everybody. Welcome to Bible class. It is Wednesday, and we are studying through the book of First John. We have First John chapter 2, and we've been studying. About walking as He has walked. We looked last time at verses 5 and 6. But whoso keepeth His word, in him verily is the love of God perfected. Hereby know we that we are in him. He that saith he abideth in him ought himself also so to walk, even as he walked. So Jesus is he is our example. Now we come to verses 7 and 8, and it says, Brethren, I write no new commandment unto you, but an old commandment which you had from the beginning. The old commandment is the word which ye have heard from the beginning. Again, a new commandment I write unto you, which thing is true in him and in you, because the darkness is past, and the true light now shineth. So you have an old commandment and you have a new commandment. And of course, John is referring to the commandment of love. In John chapter 13, Jesus says in verse 34, a new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another. So when First John mentions this, he says, a new commandment, or I write no new commandment unto you, but an old commandment which you've had from the beginning. There is a sense in which this commandment is not new. In fact, the commandment to love one another was around for a very long time. It was a commandment in the Old Testament. You have love being commanded for God, but also for neighbor. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, it says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might. And then it goes on to talk about how you should keep God's words in your heart diligently, teach them to your children, bind them on your hand as frontlets between thine eyes, write them on the doorposts of your house, etc. So love the Lord thy God. This is the commandment. But also in Leviticus chapter 19, it says, thou shalt not avenge, or Leviticus 19:18, thou shalt not avenge nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am the Lord. So love thy neighbor as thyself. This is a command that has been around for a very long time, and it's not a new commandment that he's given. The Israelites were supposed to love God. They were supposed to love one another. First John says, I am not writing a new commandment unto you. This is an old commandment. And very truly, this is something that, when it says, which you've had from the beginning, does that mean from the beginning of the world? Or does that mean from the beginning of Christianity? Or does that mean when you were converted? Probably not from the beginning of the world, because it's talking about, well, you've had this. So it's talking about something that the readers have had from the beginning of something that they've experienced. And it seems probably most likely that it's talking about from the time that you've become Christians, you've had this commandment. This is something that you've known. Now, John is writing, when he writes First John, it's a long time has passed. So he's writing many years after Christianity has begun, and this commandment to love one another, this is something that Jesus gave. He gave to the apostles, and he said, at the Last Supper, he said, I want you to love one another. And so he's saying, this is not a new commandment. Well, why would the commandment to love one another And by the way, I'm not basing the fact that this is a commandment to love one another strictly on John chapter 13. You have, after he says this is a new commandment, the very next verse there in verse 9, it says, he that says he is in the light and hates his brother is in darkness even until now. He that loves his brother abides in the light. So the text starts down this theme of love your brother, love other people. And it talks about, it develops that idea. So this begins that by saying this isn't something that's new. This is something that, well, is very old, and you've had it. You've known this since you become Christians. You've had this since you've become Christians. The old commandment is the word which ye have heard from the beginning. And isn't that true? Isn't Christianity all about the love that we have for God and the love that we have for each other? Let me look up. There's a passage. Love fervently. It's in 1 Peter chapter 1. Seeing, he says, this is 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 22. Seeing ye have purified your souls in obeying the truth through the Spirit, unto unfeigned love of the brethren, see that ye love one another with a pure heart fervently. So because you have obeyed the truth, it says you've purified by obeying the truth, or in obeying the truth through the Spirit, unto. So this is a result. This purification of your souls, that your obedience to the truth that the Spirit has given, this purification results in or leads to this love of the brethren. And notice that it's unfeigned love of the brethren, which means it's not love that you fake. Somebody could say that they love or that they have love, and you can say that all the time. But if you are faking this, then when it comes time for that love to exhibit itself truly, it's not. You're going to fall short. You're going to fail in that respect. James chapter 2 deals with this idea, not of love specifically, but it presents this scenario, and I would call this scenario a failure of love. If James 2:15, if a brother or sister be naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you say unto them, depart in peace, be ye warmed and filled, notwithstanding ye give them not those things which are needful to the body, what doth it profit? So here James presents a scenario where you have an opportunity to help somebody who is lacking, who is missing things, and this opportunity, you overlook it. Depart in peace, be ye warmed and filled. I hope everything works out for you when you have the means to help them and make it work out for them. Remember what the early church did. They had all things in common, and they didn't consider that what they owned was theirs, but instead they shared it. And that was because there was a need. When the church first began, you had people from all areas of the world meeting in Jerusalem. They become Christians, and now they're staying in Jerusalem instead of going home. Well, they're lacking. They need food. They need a place to stay. They need a lot of things. And the Christians in Jerusalem sold what they had so that they could pay the way, and so that they could support those early Christians, those brand new Christians who were there learning about this new religion that had just been established by Jesus. So there was a need, and the Christians filled that need, and they did that because of love. So what does it profit if you see somebody who is unclothed and unfed and you say, go your way in peace, be warmed and filled? It doesn't profit anything. So we have, let's see, First John. So yeah, this is that new commandment, and it is the or not, rather, this is that commandment which is not new. It's an old commandment. It's something that you had from the beginning, and it is the word that you have heard from the beginning. However, that's only in one sense. In one sense, it is no new commandment, but it is an old commandment which you have heard from the beginning. In the next verse, though, it says, again, a new commandment I write unto you, which thing is true in him and in you, because the darkness is past and the true light now shines. So how is the commandment to love a new commandment? Well, it's not that you should love, but rather it's what Jesus says in John 13:34. A new commandment that I give unto you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. This is how it's a new commandment. And when Jesus says that it's a new commandment, it's not new. The command to love isn't new, because we saw that in the Old Testament. But he says, love each other like I have loved you. Well, that speaks to the kind of love and the intensity of the love, not that it is love. So we go back to, let me see, we go back to Deuteronomy, or to Leviticus 19:18, and it says, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And if you look at their Greek translation of the Bible, that's the Greek word agape. I was wondering about that, because you might argue, well, he's commanding agape love here, and that's the new thing. But no, because when the Greeks translated the the Hebrew of Leviticus 19, they use the word agape. So you should love your neighbor as yourself. Same word there, same kind of love that was commanded. So the command to love is not a new command. Instead, though, it's the intensity that of that love. It's how much you are supposed to love and how you are supposed to love. And how did Jesus love us? Well, we know John 3:16. If we want to talk about God's love for us, when it says, for God so loved the world, what that means is, this is how God loved the world. The so there isn't talking about the intensity of his love, but he's showing us in this manner. In this manner, God loved the world. And then if you go to 1 John chapter 3, let me see, I don't want to spend too much time commenting on that, because we're going to get there. But it says, hereby perceive we the love of God, because he laid down his life for us. So when it says the love of God, who's it talking about? Well, it's talking about the one who laid down his life, Jesus. How can we perceive the love that Jesus showed for us? Well, he laid down his life for us. And we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. Right there, he's comparing our love with Christ's love. Then he's saying our love should be the same as Christ's love. Are we willing to do that? Are we willing to sacrifice our lives even? I hope we don't have to sacrifice our lives. I hope a situation doesn't come up where we would be required to sacrifice our lives. But if I have the mindset that I would be willing to sacrifice my life for you, shouldn't that mean that I have the mindset that I should be willing to sacrifice other things as well? It's amazing how somebody might say, I would sacrifice my life for you, and yet yet that same person would be unwilling to do so much less. And as Christians, it's okay to say, yeah, I really would die for the brethren. But would we really die for the brethren? Maybe you would. The question is, will you live for the brethren as well? Because you only have one chance to die. There's only one opportunity to give your life up. Once you do that, well, you're gone. So you can only do that one time, but the actions that you can take while you live are there's so much more. I would say limitless, but there is a limit on those actions. You can only do so much. So here it says, there's a new commandment that I write unto you. And it's understood there that he's talking about loving Christ, and the way that it's new is not that people didn't love before, now they do, but people didn't love the same way that Jesus loved. There's a sacrificial love that is involved there. By the way, just as a side note, I mentioned that the word agape was used in both senses back in Leviticus 19 in the Septuagint. Love one another. Well, if that's not a sacrificial love, and then here it is a sacrificial love, that shows me that the word itself, we like to make a big deal about the word agape love. Well, in one case, it means a sacrificial love. In the other case, it means not a sacrificial love. In one case, it is the love like Christ loved. In the other case, it is not the love like Christ loved, but it is a different kind of love. How do you know what words mean? You look at the context. You look at how they're being used. It's not the word itself, and the dictionary doesn't tell you that. The usage of the word tells you. All right, that's me getting on my soapbox. But here it says, this thing is true in him and in you, because darkness is past and the true light now shines. Jesus is that light. In John rather, chapter 1, it says, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in darkness, and the darkness could not overcome it. King James says, comprehended it not, but that means to overcome. It's not about understanding it in your mind. It's not like they looked at the light and couldn't understand it. No, it's the darkness could not overcome Jesus' light, because darkness can't overcome light, right? But here in verse 8, it says something very similar. It says, the true light now shines. Jesus was slain. He was put into a tomb, yet his light still shines. Why is that? Well, because he rose again the third day. And because he rose again the third day, his light was not put out. The darkness could not put that light out. Remember when Jesus was talking to, what was it? Was it Pilate? Where he said, you don't have any power except the power that God gives. I have to look up that passage. I think he's talking to Pontius Pilate, where Pilate says, don't you know that I have the power to put you to death? And Jesus says, you don't have any power except the power that God gives you. So the darkness of this world, the wicked men that wanted to kill him, they were just doing exactly as God had planned. They didn't have power over him, and they couldn't keep him in the grave. So it says the darkness is past. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be darkness, but the light now shines. What he's saying is there's a world of darkness, and now there is a beacon, there is a light, and Jesus shines, but we can also let our lights so shine among men, so that, as Jesus said in Matthew 5, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. This is all I want to talk about today. This says, wow, it's been 20 minutes. We made it through 1 John chapter 2, verses 7 and 8. And we will get into next week. It says, if you say that you're in the light, but you hate your brother, you're in darkness even now. So you can't be in the light if you have hatred in your heart. We will talk about that next week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for, hopefully you followed along in your Bibles. If with these Bible classes, hopefully that you bring your Bibles and you're following along. But I'm so glad that you could be a part of this, and I look forward to the time when we will gather again and have Bible class the normal way instead of just what we're doing here. So I hope you have a blessed day.